If you enjoy our podcast, please like and subscribe and consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal to help us bring you more content like this. You can find this episode and all of our podcasts on the Albuquerque Journal website, abqjournal.com, as well as YouTube, iTunes, and Spotify. See the show notes for a discount code on a digital subscription. Thank you for supporting the Albuquerque Journal, New Mexico's leading news.
Hey everyone, welcome to the latest edition of the Business Outlook podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Narvaiz, staff writer with the Albuquerque Journal. I want to thank C&M, our sponsor of the show today. I have on Duke Rodriguez, president and CEO of Ultra Health, a cannabis company. You probably see their shops all over Albuquerque. We touch on the illicit industry here in New Mexico and where things are headed for the cannabis industry overall in the state. I hope you enjoyed the show.
C&M is truly one college with infinite possibilities in tech and data sciences. C&M offers programs where everyone can learn about software, apps, or how to build websites. You can also choose from AI programs and machine learning, the Internet of Things, and so much more. C&M, one college, infinite possibilities, and a proud sponsor of the Albuquerque Journal's Business Outlook.
Duke, pleasure to have you on the show. For our guest, Duke Rodriguez is the president and CEO of Ultra Health, cannabis company here in New Mexico. They've been around since the medical age. Before we hop into sort of what we're going to be talking about today, which is, the cannabis industry, and, I specifically want to talk about, the illicit markets. I just want to, let you talk to our guests and tell them a little bit about yourself. So you've been involved in cannabis for quite a while, but I know you have some experience in state governments and New Mexico's healthcare system overall.
I've been in cannabis now for over a dozen years. We're one of the oldest companies in New Mexico. We probably operate more locations, more square footage than anyone in the industry. But yeah, I've done other things besides cannabis. I was the COO for Loveless when it was the health center, the group practice, and the HMO. So we run everything, the hospital, the clinic, and all the financing of healthcare. And I am a former cabinet secretary for New Mexico. Under Gary Johnson, I was the Human Services Cabinet Secretary, and in those days, we had the largest, and I guess still the largest agency with Medicaid, welfare, child support, food assistance. So it's a very large human services, statewide kind of activity. Besides those activities, I've also been president of a New York Stock Exchange company, publicly traded, based in Albuquerque, and we did national pharmacy, PBM, a pharmacy benefit management company, and mail order prescriptions.
So Duke, when did you get involved in cannabis? I know Ultra Health has been around for well over a decade now. Maybe just give us some of the origin story as it relates to that.
Really, we started cannabis, or I started working in cannabis in Arizona. Mm-hmm. There were some native New Mexicans who came to me who were able to secure a license in Arizona, where they're very limited. Even today, there's only 165 licenses. They brought it to me. They said, "What do you think about it?" And I said, "This can't be real." And it turned out to be very real. And then obviously, knowing how it worked in Arizona, I saw the same opportunity, maybe even a bigger opportunity to do that in New Mexico.
Yeah. So Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham in 2021 signed the Cannabis Regulation Act, right? This basically allowed for the sale of adult use cannabis. So we were a medical state for quite some time, and now we're both. We're about 3 years into recreational cannabis here in New Mexico. I wanted to ask you, how has the legalization of recreational cannabis in the state impacted the black market? Has it impacted the black market? And has it maybe led to a decrease in illicit activities, or maybe the opposite?
I would actually argue that since legalization, that the illicit market, or the black market, has actually grown and has established itself a larger customer base. And while illicit, but we become a central figure in the west of the U.S., in the western half of the U.S., of probably providing products not only to New Mexicans, but products also going east of the Mississippi. I think the evidence is that we had a medical program before, as you said. We had then a medical program that was $250 million. We've seen a huge expansion of grows, and some of them recently got raided, and they were illicit grows with plant counts that probably 10 times what we would have at Ultra Health. And they're obviously supplying more weed than what the state could consume on its own.
Maybe we should define that a little bit. So when I think of the illicit industry, I think of folks who are acting unlawfully without a license, but there's also quite a bit of bad actors within the industry. So, how would you define the illicit industry here in New Mexico?
So imagine this. Before we had 35 licensees under the medical program, and they were serving about, under the medical program, nearly 150,000 cardholders. So if that was adequate for 150,000 cardholders, now we have 3,000 plus licensees. So for me, the illicit market is not the homie just on the corner or the illicit grower up in the Four Corners area with 250,000 plants. It also includes those who have licenses, hanging them on the wall, and in fact, either not paying cannabis excise tax, gross receipts tax, or simply selling product out the door. It's anyone who sells product that is not taxed, that is not regulated, that is not in any way controlled and reported in the current seed to sale system.
That's an interesting point that you bring up. So, businesses that aren't paying their cannabis excise tax to the states. So you're saying that these are also illicit operators?
Absolutely. If you're not paying gross receipts tax, if you're not paying cannabis excise tax, aren't you like any other illicit dealer? Just because you secured a license, and remember, 3,000 people have been able to secure a license, so that's not a difficult task.
Yeah. So there are over 3,000 licenses that have been approved by the Cannabis Control Division, which regulates the cannabis industry here in New Mexico. When you hear that number, 3 years into recreational sales, what comes to mind for you?
Matt, when we first contemplated legalization, even me and my team, we sat around the table and we actually predicted how many licenses would be issued. We put them in an envelope, and I can tell you the highest guess was maybe we'd grow from 35 licenses to maybe 250. And I think one person by themselves was the outlier at 600. Never did anybody think that would be in the thousands. What makes it even more interesting, when you brought up about paying taxes, we have 3,000 licensees. There are 700 registered accounts with the Tax and Revenue Department. And every month we get a report how many actually filed reports and paid taxes. That number is around 300 or less. So we know that there's a lot of licenses, but way more than anybody could have guessed, and they're probably not compliant.
I don't have the number in front of me, but I know the largest share of license holders are retailers, and anyone who lives in Albuquerque or just in the States sees these shops on every corner. What are your thoughts on that? It's a big change from even just a few years ago.
If someone would have told me that we would have more dispensaries than there are Starbucks, Burger King, McDonald's combined, I would have said impossible. But in fact, we have more. There are 1,000 retail licenses issued, yes, and it's probably the single largest category. But again, if you look at the BioTrack report, how many actually reported sales? Not 1,000 are reporting sales, somewhere around 750, 760. So there's a real disconnect between who's grabbing these licenses and who's actually playing by the rules.
Mm-hmm. Can you give me some examples? And I know you touched on this a little bit earlier, but can you give me some examples of challenges that the industry is facing as it relates to operators not acting lawfully? Maybe some particular examples, or maybe the illicit market more generally, maybe folks that aren't licensed exactly.
I'll give you an idea. So there are so many licenses out there. You have to realize it makes it very difficult for law enforcement to say, is this a legal grow or is this a illegal grow? Are they going to stop at everything that smells like weed and say, show me your permit, show me your license? So it's becoming very hard, to the point that I think we've just dropped any surveillance, any supervision, any enforcement. On a Friday night recently, right there on Central Boulevard in Albuquerque at the corner of like Cornell and Central, you can stop in and there's a thing called El Baile. And in there, I walked in Friday night, 6 p.m., 7 p.m., and there are probably 150, 200 vendors with tables set up. Some of them have licenses, most of them don't. It's illegal, it's illicit, and they sell openly, not just cannabis. They're selling everything from knockoff candies that look like Hershey's or look like Runts, but basically anything you can imagine, including mushrooms, LSD, fentanyl, available for sale in open or evening light.
Yeah. To your knowledge, has law enforcement been made aware of this, or state regulators?
The state is aware, local law enforcement's aware, the DA's aware. It's no secret. I think it's it's the worst kept secret in Albuquerque. But I think the repeated response has been, well, we have bigger issues. We have human trafficking, and I get it. We have violent crime, understand. But still, this is a clear violation of the statute and is illegal.
Yeah. Businesses like this, if you can call it that, that don't have a license, and other businesses that do have licenses that are acting unlawfully, how does that have an effect on a business like Ultra Health or other operators that are out there acting lawfully?
When legalization went into force, we peaked out at about 35, 36 locations. We ourselves have felt the impact of illegal illicit sales. I think we've closed 7 locations in the last 18 months. Now, 7 may not seem a lot to someone. They say, well, Duke, you still got 29, 30 locations. I get it. But that's a reduction in force of about 20%. That's employees who lost their job. That's landlords who lost a tenant. That's commerce that went to the illicit market. So we have felt competition from the legal market, but we felt greater impact from the illicit market. And if it's happening to our size entity, I can assure you it's happening to a lot of other operators who are even smaller.
I know recently you've walked into some smoke shops here in Albuquerque and, purchased certain products that weren't labeled cannabis exactly. Can you give, our listeners a rundown of what you did, what kind of products you purchased, and, what they ended up testing for?
So keep in mind, the state law makes it very clear to sell cannabis, which is any product with greater than 0.3% THC, you must have a license from the state. You must be inspected. You must have certain conditions. You must pay cannabis excise tax. You pay gross receipts tax. Now you can buy these products, well, let's call them intoxicating hemp products. Hemp products that allegedly were derived from hemp. And keep in mind, hemp is no different than cannabis, except it's supposed to have low levels of THC. Well, I kept wondering, why are these smoke shops, gas stations, convenience stores selling these intoxicating hemp products? And I literally said, I need to know firsthand for my own appreciation and understanding. I went into, I think, 5 different locations, bought 10 products. Of the 10 products, 9 of the 10s had levels greatly in excess of the federal law, greatly in excess of the state law. Some of them had THC levels of potency of greater than 24, 25%. Let me give you the comparison. What we sell every day in a licensed dispensary is at about the same range, 24, 25 and above. Mm-hmm. So it is straight up weed, available for sale, no cannabis excise tax, pull it off the shelf, jump in your car, and you can buy it now without a license.
There are a lot of smoke shops in Albuquerque. A lot of them that also sell, these CBD pre-rolls. I mean, if you had to take a guess, how many of these shops do you think are selling, CBD that is actually cannabis, with high levels of THC?
I would say I wouldn't know how many of them are selling products like that, but I would tell you probably 90+% of the products that they are selling are illegal. I know other investigators are looking into it. I know law enforcement we've spoken to understands it's a huge issue. Some states like Texas or California, other states have taken the position just outright banning that. There is legislature, a bill introduced in this session to ban these products. But imagine that every day, Matt. These products are being sold to kids every day, untested, high potency levels, and who knows what pesticides are present. It's a bad, bad thing. So I consider that, again, part of that illicit market.
Yeah, and I think there is strong support for that bill from, what I've heard. So we'll see where that goes. But, I want to go back to sort of what we consider the legalized cannabis markets. I think it, through from April 22 when sales started through, now there's been about a dozen licenses that have been revoked by the CCD. Clay Bailey, the regulation and licensing department superintendent, told the legislative committee last year that, the Cannabis Control Division inspectors conducted more than 2,000 inspections through October. when you hear those numbers, 12 licenses that have been revoked, they have increased. It sounds like last year, the number of inspections they've done, but there are still, more than 3,000 licenses out there. I mean, when you hear those numbers, just, what comes to mind for you?
To the everyday consumer, they might get some comfort from the number 2,000, from 12 licenses being revoked. I will tell you that reflects non-enforcement, low enforcement, or really no impact. When you hear 2,000, I can tell you within our locations, we probably got inspected 70, 80 times. So it really does account for the legacy operators being hit routinely because they're very available. They're in Albuquerque. They're easy. They're safe locations. So I don't think that's reflective of the 3,000 that should have been inspected. So we have a difference between how many have been actually inspected that need to be inspected. There were sites, for example, called Weed on Wheels or the Weed Shack. And these are locations that were not really inspected for almost 2 years. And they were vans driving around the city selling weed. So I would tell you, it sounds impressive when you revoke 12 licenses. I will tell you, they probably, realistically, if they looked into it, and I think they've actually testified in committee, that when they go in and do an inspection, about 25% of those they inspect, in fact, were doing illegal activities. So let's say instead of having 12 licenses revoked, maybe we should have had like 800 licenses revoked.
Yeah. More recently, the Cannabis Control Division Director, Todd Bailey, had told the legislative committee that, the division sees about 22 to 24% of license holders that, quote, have some sort of criminal element in them, through some of the site inspections that they've conducted. Does that sound right to you? About a quarter of businesses with, some sort of criminal element to them?
I think that is great that that's a number they've come up with. So let's say a quarter of those actually licensed are carrying on illicit activities. Well, we've never been picked for illicit activities, so that means it's not our 40 or 80 inspections. It's not, our Greenleaf's 40 or Everest. So it's these new licensees that are popping up. And if 25% of the ones they actually approach are illicit, extrapolate that. That means over a fourth of our entire industry is probably fraud, under the table, illegal, untaxed, untested. And let's talk about the testing. Some of the unlicensed ones are bad operators. Is just recently they announced a complete shutdown of a lab because they weren't even doing tests that were being applied to those products. Yeah,
I recently wrote about that for the Monday Journal edition. Going back to, some of these bad actors within the industry, I know there is a legislative proposal out there right now that has passed through, I think, a couple of committees at this point to add law enforcement officers to the Cannabis Control Division. They'd basically have the ability to, act like cops within CCD. What do you think about that? I think the plan is to add about a half dozen.
I understand the bill, and I've read it. And, you would think as an industry operator, I would immediately embrace the idea of having cannabis cops. I'm not convinced it's the right thing. The reason they want to provide this is they're saying law enforcement's not doing enough.
Yeah.
Well, law enforcement is trained at doing this. Law enforcement knows the due process. Law enforcement has the equipments, the vehicles, is already out there. If law enforcement's not doing the job because they don't have the resources, give them the resources.
Yeah.
Rather than redirecting those resources to within RLD and CCD and then spending, 12 to 18 months getting them up to speed, hiring them, getting them to understand the cannabis rules and regulations, getting them to understand the statutes, providing them with vehicles, with equipment. We're 2 years away from having any benefit. So from my standpoint, if law enforcement is tasked, and the current law does task them with this duty, let them do it.
Yeah. What does it take to fix this industry as it relates to, the illicit side of things?
Clearly, it's not an easy fix. I mean, cannabis is being impacted by New Mexico and Albuquerque and Santa Fe and Las Cruces' impact of crime. Once the criminals out there believe that there's no enforcement, and I think whether it's auto theft or home burglaries, or we probably have a store broken in every month.
Yeah.
A location every single month is broken into, at least one or more. We get never, as long as I've been with Ultra House, not has one time has anybody been arrested or prosecuted. So I think the word is out there. You know, it's a free-for-all. And so, in my opinion, we have to get to the root cause of crime in New Mexico. It's poverty. But we also have to give law enforcement, because there is so much poverty, give law enforcement the resources to do the job. Quit trying to create new redundant forces.
You know, I think my last question for you, Duke, is, you know, what's the future for the cannabis industry here? I know you've talked to me a lot about the downsizing of the industry. You know, we have too many retailers out there, too many growers, too many manufacturers. You know, where do you see this thing heading more generally?
I think to summarize it, I would tell you that we have to acknowledge that, jokingly say, you know, the bloom is off the rose. In this case, the bloom is off the flower. The green rush is over. The great American dream is not really what it was intended to be, and instead we've created the New Mexico nightmare, and a lot of people have been hurt. Clearly, sales have stagnated. I think the department even testified that the numbers are now stagnant. I think now we're going to see a decline in the industry. The question is, do people vacate the industry first, or do they themselves choose to become illicit operators? So my big fear is that we're going to see a gradual to a moderate decline in sales over the next 12 to 18 months. And I think we're going to see probably a dramatic increase in illicit activity where people are saying, you know what, I just want to recoup my investment. And for me to recoup my investment, I'm going to start selling product out the door. I heard somebody tell me that the industry is now filled with apathy. And I think that's a fair description. I think we've gotten an industry that says, look how bad it's gotten. The state hasn't given us the protections, the assistance that we need. Law enforcement didn't step up. So I think a lot of people are going to essentially, over the next year and a half, throw up their hands and either walk away or sell out the back door.
Duke, thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Not a problem. Thank you.